Would be walking you through a neovim plugin, remote-nvim.nvim, and what this plugin helps you do is it enables you to do remote development in neovim. I would also be showing you how you can use the same plugin to do development in DevContainers when you use another open source tool called devpod. So let's just get started. I would first of all show you my test environment, and let's go over that first. So here I have my test environment. So I would be showing you two things: how you can use the remote plugin to basically connect over SSH in using passwords and using your SSH config files. So these SSH config files can be key based as well, so that works too. And then I would be walking you through how you can develop inside dev containers. So let's get started. So what I have here is I've created a Docker image that basically runs an SSH server inside it, and let me just start that. So I started that, and now you can connect to the SSH server using this command. So this is my first test environment, and it uses password based authentication. So let's just get started with it, right? And later on I would show you how to do it with a dev container. So as you saw, I could log in into the system only using a password, and now I would show you just the config for this plugin. So I would recommend you to use the tags so that you don't pick up breaking changes while working on your day-to-day work. And I'm running it with the default configuration. I have not yet made any configuration changes. I would later on show you one very good configuration change that you can make to customize how this plugin works for you. Okay, so let's see how we can do it. So I go in the terminal, and you would see that there are certain commands that this plugin exposes: remote start, remote stop, and I would cover them one by one, but the most important is obviously remote start, which will initiate your remote connection with the SSH. So remote start, I just type that and hit enter, and it shows me two options over here: connect to host using a connection string, where I can just dump my connection string that I normally use to connect to a server, and second is select a host from my SSH config file. So a lot of the times we save certain hosts that we connect to frequently in SSH config file. So if you want to develop on one of those hosts, you can just select it from the SSH config file instead of trying to type out the command. So since this is a new fresh remote host that I just created, let's go with connect to host using connection string. So I go there, and I'll just use my fill, my autocomplete, my history fill. So I do that, and just like how it happened in the terminal, it's asking me for the password. I enter the password and hit enter, and now as you can see, it's trying to determine the OS, and it determined that the OS was Linux. And now it's asking me what neovim version do I want to install on the remote host. So locally I have version 0.9.1 installed. I'm going to select that as the version that should be installed on the remote. I hit enter, and it starts installing the it installs the script over there, and then it starts installing neovim over there. And once that's completed, it asks me if I want to copy over my personal neovim configuration onto the remote machine, so that I get the same environment that I have locally, on the remote as long as the dependencies are present on the remote. So for now I would just hit yes, but as you can see there are a few more options over here. No is obviously do not copy. Yes and do not ask again essentially means that I want to make the selection once and don't ask me about this remote server again. So the plugin would store this information in its configuration so that the next time you try to connect to this remote host, it won't ask you this prompt again. So since I don't want to get asked this prompt again, I would select yes and do not ask again. And now it says that the remote server has been launched, and I can just choose yes to launch the neovim client. And as you can see there are the same 4 options over here for the same 4 choices. So for now I would just choose yes, and you can see that there's an empty prompt over here, which is not something that I expected, because uh, when I copied over my configuration, what I expect to see is that my configuration gets loaded, right? But this is not something that's in the plugin's purview, because this is an issue with the host. So once I typed messages to see what happened in the server. So as you can see that my package manager, I used lazy.nvim, it started to bootstrap, but it could not find the git executable. So what I would do is I would launch a terminal over the remote, and then I would just install git. So once I have git, my package manager should be able to bootstrap itself and install the dependencies over from GitHub, so that everything is available on the remote as well. Obviously there's a need for internet connection for this, so that should be present. So my git installation is complete. What I would do now is I would quit this and quit the server, and as you can see it has stopped the remote neovim server, and start the connection again. So now I don't have to go through the entire UI, it has already saved that configuration. So I enter a space and then hit tab, and as you can see it, since I have only one server configured right now, that was the only match, so it filled that, and I hit enter and everything works automatically, except remember that I chose that I should be given the prompt every time. So I click yes, and now you see an empty screen and you wonder what's happening. So what's happening is, because of how my configuration is written, the package manager is still bootstrapping itself, and that's why you saw nothing. So if I hit lazy, you'll see that it installed a lot of the plugins, and I would just hit update on it so that it installs all the plugins. So now as you can see that it has installed all the plugins and everything works as it would work on your local, right? So let me show you that this is the remote machine. So if I go to my local machine, you would see that this is a Mac OS that you can see from Darwin, and this is the Alpine image that I have used to create the SSH environment. So this is how you can SSH into a remote server and start developing, right? It's easy. Yeah, I don't have a working environment to show how you can program in it, but I would get to that when I get to the dev containers. So I exit from here, and now I would show you how to connect to a server from your SSH config. So I go there, and now you would see there's a third option there. Now you can also select the already configured workspace from here. Since I have only configured one, you see that there's only test@rate localhost on port 9111. So let me just connect to a host from the SSH config. So this is basically my Docker machine VM that is available over SSH. So I would just connect to that, and because this is entirely local, it's pretty fast. So as you would see that all the copy commands and the commands that I run over it happen very quickly. And but since this is something that's on my local, it has a lot of executables already there. So as you can see that I did not need to install Git over here. So ideally, if you're using a plugin manager that's dependent on Git, hopefully your remote system already has Git present over there, which would usually be the case. Okay, so I have this ready, and as you can see, if I do uname again, it's a different machine altogether. You see that it's Linux Colema. Yeah, so this is how you can do it using SSH config. Now on to the interesting part, that is basically how do I use dev containers, how do I do everything in dev containers, right? So for that I am going to use devpod, and devpod is an open source tool that lets you create your development environments out of dev containers. It follows the entire specification. It lets you follow it. It follows it to the word and creates your dev container exactly like what would happen in VS Code or IntelliJ. So this is the command. So what I'm gonna do is I'll take the one of the example repos that is provided by Microsoft, VS Code remote trinode, and use that to show it. So the fun part about this is that devpod supports SSH, so it says that it has configured it, and it also allows you to access that dev container using SSH. So I would just go there, and what I would do is I would just restart, and I would hit remote start, and then now it said that it has I can access it using SSH VS Code remote trinode. And why this is possible is because it has written a certain host entry in my SSH config file, which you can obviously see from here. So this is the host entry that it has written, and it uses an agent to basically a proxy command to handle everything. But that does not concern us. We can just use it like normal SSH. So I would choose that, and the same operations run over there. It determines the OS. If it's compatible, it copies over the installation script, and then it installs your neovim, then copies over your configuration, and after copying over your configuration, it starts your server if everything works alright, and if your server starts up properly, then it starts your client. That's the general process that the plugin goes through. So I would choose yes and do not ask me again, just so that I don't get prompted again and again for this every time I want to bring the server up. Yeah, and I would choose yes again, right? So this is my dev container, and since this is a dev container, it is usually concerned with programming in there. So I would be able to show you the LSPs running inside and show you that they work alright inside there. So yeah, just let's give it a second for the plugins to complete, and the plugins have completed. So I use Mason for basically managing my LSP servers. So I would run Mason over here so that it already started installing my servers in the background. What I essentially wanted to do is to install my TypeScript language server, because this is a tri-node dev container, so it would need the TypeScript language server to work to basically get the LSP completions. So yeah, let's wait for that to happen. And yeah, while that's happening, what I would do is, so this is just a plugin that I use, so nvim tree. So in the dep container, all the code that's there gets deployed inside the workspaces folder. So I would just quickly cd into that, and now I'm inside that folder. You can see that this is the dev container, devcontainer.json that they use. So yeah, so what I would do is I'll just check if my lsp is up or not. So yeah, my lsp is downloaded and installed. I would just open server.js and I would hit edit for my lsp to take up. Yeah, and because I usually track this with my status line, so I would just call my plugin manager and ask it to reload my status bar. So yeah, as you can see, I can also do lsp info, and you can see that the buffers are, the lsp clients are attached to the lsp servers, and 3 lsp servers are running. And if you look at paths, they're all inside a remote nvim folder. So everything happens inside a separate folder, and this plugin does not try to modify your path or like do some magic over there. Everything is installed inside the remote nvim folder. So anytime you want to get rid of remote nvim plugins data from your server, you just delete this folder and everything goes away. Your slate is clean. And this function is also available through a command that I will be showing you later, but let's get to that later. So yeah, as you can see that everything is happening inside, and I get all the completions that I need. All the errors are there. I can see the definitions. I can go to the definition of the word. I can see what's there. And since my installation happened in this particular launch, a lot of my plugins are not completely loaded because my configuration is not completely appropriate for like running in the same instance as when they're installed. So what I would do is I would quit and do a remote start again, just to show you the difference. So this was the particular host that I was working on, and now once the installation is complete, the process becomes faster because it doesn't need to install again. It just needs to check that the installation is valid or not. So setup got completed. Now it searched for a remote. Yeah, so I would just choose yes, and now you'd see that this is way better than what it was before. I would just go back to the folder, and yeah, let me start that server.js file again. Right, and now you see the completions much better. So you can see, yeah, all the plugins will immediately start working. Yeah. So yeah, this is all there is to this plugin. Not a lot, just a simple plugin. Sorry for the background noise, but let me continue. Yeah, so this is how you can develop inside dev containers as well. Now let me show you. So this is the info bar, the info box. So right now I have no active remote sessions, so let me start a few sessions. So what I would do is remote start the VS Code, but instead what I would do is I would choose not to start the client, just so that we can see what's happening. So yeah, it's searching for a free port now, and I would choose no over here. And now I just start the remote session command, and now you see, so global info contains the global information like, hey, where is my log, where are my logs, right? And this would kind of contain your every host that you are connected to right now. So in this host ID you can see that there's VS Code remote try, that basically the host that we connected to. And if I wanted to connect to this locally, like not using this particular instance, I can just copy this and paste it over here, and you would see that the server gets launched just like that. I don't need to do anything else, right? And this is all working on the remote. Yeah, so yeah, there's that. Although it does get a bit slow, the remote, but yeah. So this is how it works. Now there are a bunch of other commands as well, like remote log to basically see the logs for your plugin, and then there is remote stop to stop any active servers, but we don't have any active servers because as soon as I kill the UI for this using colon Q, the server also gets killed. This is just a limitation with, not actually a limitation, this is just something that's built in neovim right now. There is no particular command that lets you just exit the UI and not kill the server, although there is a workaround, but it's not perfect. Yeah, so let's see what other commands we have. So there's remote cleanup, there is remote config deletion. The remote cleanup is for basically cleaning up your host. So for example, I don't want to work with, like I don't want to work with this plugin on test localhost again, so I can just clean it up. So yeah, it asks me if I want to just delete my workspace, which would just delete the path where all the configuration related to my particular environment is installed, or do I want to delete everything that's related to remote nvim on the remote machine. So if there are multiple people working on that same host using the same user account, which is sometimes the case, then you can just choose to delete my workspace so that your work does not impact somebody else who is using this plugin. Otherwise, if you are the sole user of it, you can just choose to delete everything remote neovim on remote. Since I'm the only one using it, I just chose that, and the cleanup completed. And now, as you can see, it no longer remembers this particular host and everything is clean. You can start with a fresh install of remote-nvim over there if you want. What other configuration? Let's see what other options do we have. There's remote config del. So this is essentially remote config delete, and this is for for the situations where sometimes you work with ephemeral Docker containers or SSH machines, and these SSH machines come and go, like for example an AMR code machine, or when you're working on a job cluster, so it might come up and then go away. So that configuration is just sitting in your system. So let's just try to replicate that. What I would do is I would do a devpod delete, and I would delete the container, the dev container that I had just created, right? So I deleted that, and now let me just try to clean it up, right? So I want to clean it up, but let's see what happens. So it tried to connect to the remote host, but that remote host does not exist anymore, right? So what now? How do I clean it up? Because now it just shows up in my logs, and right now it might not be a problem, but when I have multiple servers, there's just a lot of trash that's around, right? So what I can do is I can just do remote config delete and ask the plugin to forget everything about this particular server. So now if you do remote start, you would see that it has forgotten all about it, right? So yeah, that's about it. Yeah, one the good bit for the last part is, like, a lot of you might not have liked the default UI that came with it, like when I did remote start and let's say this, and I hit this UI is kind of just like inside you see seeing a neovim instance in a floating window inside neovim. This is not the interface that you would like. Again, sorry for the background noise, but yeah, what can we do about it? So let's try to fix that. So The plugin gives you an option to configure how your UI gets launched, and I would show you an example of that. So this is my configuration. I already have this bit written, but what it allows you to do is whenever it's time to launch the client, it allows you to run your own callback function, using which you can kind of launch that client anywhere you want. So for me, I'm using the Wisdom terminal. So if in this particular instance, I'm launching the terminal in a separate tab and that separate tab essentially contains my remote client. So let me do that. So I have saved my configuration, and now what I would do is I would just hit remote start, and I would say start Colema, and I would say start the client, and you would see that it started the client in a new tab, right? There's a new tab all there, and yeah, that's how you can start it in a new tab, and everything would work as you want it. Thank you for joining. That would be all.